Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm Ernestine Lyons and I host a channel that talks about languages, politics, history, and all things international. I bring global, local, and I come to you on a very somber occasion. We have just experienced yesterday the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Her Majesty the Queen. And I want to make this video to talk about her life. For those of you who have been watching my channel, I did a whole series talking about the history of the royals, and I wanted to continue that leading up to the Windsors, but I think this was a very, monumentous occasion to, that we lose the Queen after most of us have only ever known Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II as our queen, and now we welcome a new king, King Charles III. So I just want to jump right into the life of Queen Elizabeth II. So on September 8th, 2022, Her Majesty, Her Royal Highness, Queen Elizabeth II died at the age of 96. The longevity was in her blood. Her mother lived to be 102, and her husband who was also her cousin, lived to be 99 years old. He lived to be 99 years old. The Queen was born in England in 1926. She was the first daughter of the then Duke of York, Albert and Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. Albert was Duke of York, and his wife, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. No relation to Ernestine Lyon, because it was Lyons me, Lyon her. Her grandfather was King George V, and he was a very, traditional monarch, very much stern and stiff upper lip, as was her grandmother, who she looks identical to, Queen Mary. She was never really directly supposed to be in line to inherit. She was in the line of succession, but everyone assumed that her uncle, David, would inherit the throne when her grandfather, King George V, passed away. So her uncle David was Prince of Wales, and he was this playboy prince, very flamboyant, and, just this womanizer, but he always had this string of married mistresses or married women or formerly married women, and one of them who caught his eye was Wallis Simpson. Wallis Simpson was a twice divorced American woman who the Crown and the administration at the time knew this was going to be a problem because they were far more traditional than we are today. They just knew that there was a scandal brewing. So when Prince David became King Edward VII at the death of King George V, he was being told by the administration that he had to give up Wallis Simpson in order to become king. And so a year before the coronation, he abdicated the throne in order to marry Wallis Simpson, the woman he loved. So he gave up the throne, and next in line to the throne was Queen Elizabeth II's father, Prince Albert, Duke of York. So then Prince Albert became King George VI. And so you'll see these Regnal names that when people become king or queen, they have the choice to choose a Regnal name. David became King Edward VII. Albert became King George V. There was talk that Prince Charles would take on the name King George VII. I'm actually glad that he's King Charles, because for 70 years we've known him as Prince Charles. Charles is his first name, so I was going to be a little upset if he decided to take on a whole different Regnal name, which doesn't make much sense. But I digress. So he gave up Wallis, abdicated the throne, and then his younger brother Albert became King of England, and his daughter, Queen Elizabeth, he had two daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret. Margaret was born in 1930, and Queen Elizabeth, of course, was born in 1926. And Queen Elizabeth became heir to the throne. So Albert, or King George VI, Elizabeth, the Queen consort, Queen Elizabeth or Elizabeth Senior, Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth were a very merry pair, and they were dubbed by the king as We Four, and they lived a very happy domestic life of stability, and they became this sort of stalwart or symbol of hope and normalcy for the British people. In addition to that, during World War II, they were also seen as this symbol of resilience and strength, because the king refused to leave the UK when he was urged to, because there were so many bombings and raids that happened on England at the time. And he was this source of strength for the English people, and as were the princesses. The princesses, they volunteered with the armed forces. Queen Elizabeth became a mechanic, and she learned so many different things to help the war effort, and they were devoted civil servants during this time. And at the age of 21, Princess Elizabeth, she pledged her whole life, whether it be long or short. And it's interesting, she said long or short, because she lived a long life. She was actually, upon her death, the longest reigning British monarch. She's beat out only by a French king, I believe is King Louis XVI, who became king when he was literally like 6 years old. And she beat out Queen Victoria, who was the longest reigning British monarch. And so for 70 years, it's just been Queen Elizabeth. She pledged her whole life, whether it be long or short, to serve the people. So by the end of World War II, Princess Elizabeth became a mechanic. She learned leadership, and she had fallen in love. Her cousin, Prince Philip, they both share Queen Victoria as a great-great-grandparent. Prince Philip was this naval officer and, a few years older than her, but they kind of kept a correspondence, and after the war, they married. In 1947, she married Prince Philip Mountbatten. In 1947, she married Prince Philip Mountbatten. The king, at a certain point, people knew that he had cancer, but they really tried to keep it under wraps. And as his health declined, he was a chain smoker, and he had to have part of a lung removed, but his health continued to decline, and as a result, he relied on Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip to fill in for him for a lot of royal duties. And they did this, while her children were really young. They did a tour of the Commonwealth nations, and the Queen was actually in Africa when she found out that her father had passed away. And so the king passed away in 1952. But before that, in 1948, the Queen's oldest son, Prince Charles, now King Charles, was born, followed by Princess Anne in 1950. So the king died in 1952. Queen Elizabeth becomes Queen Elizabeth II, and she was coronated in 1953 and was the first royal to ever have a televised coronation. Britain and the world was changing by the 1960s, and the Queen had welcomed 2 more kids. She had Prince Andrew in 1960 and Prince Edward in 1964. Prince Charles was then invested as Prince of Wales in 1969 in an elaborate ceremony in Wales. He even learned Welsh for the whole, aspect of trying to get closer to the Welsh people. And this was a time of a lot of dissent and sort of, agitation with the people. There were a lot of separatist movements in Ireland and in Wales. In addition, there was more pressure on the royal family to, relate more to people. So in the late 60s, they actually invited television crews in to film a documentary called Royal Family that just kind of showed them being normal people. And so it kind of went behind the veil of the majesty that is, royal life. And this seemed to, spark an obsession into, peering into the private lives of the royals. I think this kind of reached an apex during when Princess Diana died in 1997 in a car crash being chased by the paparazzi. The Queen met with many heads of state. She opened parliament. She met with prime ministers, and so many to count. And then, of course, 14 U.S. presidents, from Harry Truman all the way down to Joe Biden. She lived a long, happy life and was a symbol of strength, British strength, that service, that duty, that stiff upper lip, that sort of, you don't show emotions, it's not about you, it's more about service to the people. But that same sort of keep calm and carry on mentality, which was the trademark for the way that the Queen's father served, it was duty no matter what. You put family and honor and duty and service to the people above your own personal happiness. They sort of saw that as a weakness when, King Edward VII resigned because he wanted to marry the person he loved. That wasn't the way of the new monarchs. That, in this post-World War II era, it was more about you don't have feelings and you keep going because the crown is what's important. The institution of the British monarchy is what's important. And that was something that also caused a lot of criticism because, there were several instances in which Queen Elizabeth II put the crown first and the institution of the monarchy. Who cares about your feelings? In the case of her sister, Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret wanted to marry Peter Townsend, who was the king's assistant. And, he was also much older than Princess Margaret. He was also still married when they fell in love. And then he ended up divorced. But there was another scandal that was eerily similar to when Queen Elizabeth's uncle, King Edward VII, had to resign to marry Wallis Simpson, and it just had all the hints of another scandal. And so the Queen did not allow for Margaret to marry Peter Townsend, and she was heartbroken. And Margaret eventually, she was apparently really upset, I should say allegedly really upset with the Queen. She ended up marrying someone else, Anthony Snowden. She then ended up marrying Lord Snowden. She was never really happy. The marriage, had its rocky points, and Princess Margaret, and eventually Princess Margaret and Lord Snowden ended up, divorced, and there were scandals, there were affairs. Princess Margaret ended up with, all of these other high-profile relationships that were seen as inappropriate and embarrassing to the crown. And then eventually the marriages of her children, ended in scandals, affairs, and divorces because, in the case of Prince Charles, he had always been in love with Camilla Parker Bowles, and they forced him to marry a 19-year-old when he was in his 30s. They wanted someone who was going to be a fit, proper queen and, a wonderful woman who, didn't have a past or history and, this perfect princess. Whereas, Charles really kind of was in need of this sort of more maternal figure, which Camilla really was for him. So the marriages ended in divorce, with Princess Anne getting divorced, having an affair. Prince Andrew, he and Fergie ended up with Fergie, the Duchess of York, ended up having affairs, and the marriage ended in divorce. And so this all happened and culminated in 1992, and with Windsor Castle catching on fire. And, she dubbed this year her Annus Horribilis, which was her terrible year in Latin. And, because there was so much private scandal, and then there was a personal suffering where Windsor Castle, burned, and, then the public had to actually, pay the cost to that. And so, there was just this more critical eye on the royal family after that. And, then there was also the death of Princess Diana. She was hunted by the paparazzi, and the public for the first time criticized her, along with Tony Blair, the prime minister at the time. He really urged her to make a public statement and to, say something. And many people were just wondering, where is our queen? We're hurting as a nation. I remember being a kid and being really, really sad to see, Princess Diana. Everybody loved her, and she was the Queen of Hearts. And, to just see her passing, even though she wasn't her royal family, she was still the mother of the, heir to the throne, Prince William. So even though the Queen eventually addressed the public and showed, herself to be a devoted grandmother and thanked the public for their outpouring of, sympathy, and, she mourned with them, it was still this moment where she was just very stiff upper lip, and as it was a stark contrast to the way that Princess Diana had been so open, so vulnerable, so, touching and familiar with the people. And I think that was something that the people kind of wanted to see from their monarch. That was just something that was kind of like a hiccup in her reign. So she was a stalwart in British history and a figure in all public events. She was there during World War I, the Falkland Islands conflict, which her son Prince Andrew fought in, and all the way until like the Iraq wars, where Prince Harry ended up fighting in operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so she's been there through all of these conflicts over the years. She served during the energy crisis in the UK, natural disasters, man-made disasters, terrorist attacks, a global pandemic, and she survived COVID herself. And then in 2002, she also lost her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, or the Queen Mum, as everybody calls her, followed by Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret, her little sister, passed away in 2002, the same year as her mother. And then more changes and transitions happened. Her son, Prince Charles, married Camilla Parker Bowles, the love of his life, in 2005. And more of the public and even the Queen warmed to accepting Camilla. And it's actually Camilla will become Queen Consort, and this is actually at the urging of the Queen herself. She wanted Camilla to be more accepted and to take on this role, when I know there was a lot of talk about, like, will Camilla become Queen, because people's allegiance and loyalty to Diana and the affair that, Camilla was the other woman, and this whole relationship with Charles and Diana. There wasn't a lot of sympathy from on Camilla's side of things. All through all of this, the Queen has always been there, and her adult grandchildren have been married, and from Peter Phillips to Zara to Prince William to Prince Harry to Princess Eugenie and Beatrice, they've all been married now. They all have children, and now the Queen has great grandkids. And so the Queen has been this loving figure and this, guiding grandmother, and a great grandmother, where great grandson Prince George is now third and now second in line to the British throne. So, and in 2021, her husband Prince Philip and the rock at her side, and the man who stood and walked behind her with his arms always like behind him and so stoic. He passed away just shy of his 100th birthday. And since then, it's been the Queen without her consort, the Queen without her companion, her life partner. But she still believed in duty and service all the way up to the very end. And literally 2 days before she passed away, she was meeting with the new prime minister, saying goodbye to Boris Johnson and welcoming in a new prime minister, a new regime, her final prime minister. She was surrounded by her family at her death. So Prince Charles, now King Charles III, has issued a statement, and he formally made a statement addressing all of the people of Britain, the Commonwealth, and the world. And I just watched it, and it was very moving, his first act as king. But he also issued a statement, which I'll read. I'll read it in his accent. The death of my beloved Queen, the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen. Okay, that's enough of that. Is a moment of greatest sadness for me and for all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign, a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms, the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. All right, well, this has been my exploration of the life of Queen Elizabeth II, Her Majesty the Queen, and may she rest in peace, and long live King Charles III. Thank you for watching, and hope to have you on other journeys as we explore history. We talk about social commentary, political issues, and explore languages of the world and the countries in them. Let's bring global local. All right, I'm Ernestine Lyons. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a great one.